So in the first session, I said that they sat us in order of niceness. The nicest not being first, but now that you said we're outstanding speakers, I think we get more outstanding as we go. I'm not sure I'm going to win on this one today, but so they did put the regulator first. So obviously not the nicest, but not really here today to talk to you about the regulations per se, but more the education and understanding on why we've picked up our enforcement of those regulations, why those regulations are in place and necessary, and what we need to be keeping in mind. So then I will turn it over to Che-Wei, and he will go more into the strategy that the province is looking for and a vision going forward. So I'll touch a bit on why we're here. Yes, I'm with the Ministry of Environment, but as you see when we go through the presentation, we're really talking more about protection to human health as well as the environment. A little bit about where we are now as a province, the future. I am going to touch on some costs and some opportunities going forward. So this is just a slide. As I go through today's presentation, not everything is my information or put together from government, but I have stolen some slides from some sessions that were put on in November. The Solid Waste Association of North America had 2 sessions where they brought speakers in, so I'll touch on some of their information, trying to cram a whole day's worth of sessions into 20 minutes. And an individual from the regional landfill in Drumheller, she gives a very inspirational and dynamic speak on their regionalization in Drumheller going back 20 years and how they came together as communities and really getting people to think about that difference they want to make. And she talks about how all of the communities had a lot of fears of coming together and none of those fears were actually realized, but in order to getting them to that point, they were having town halls and open houses and nobody was coming. And it really took that visionary of the mayor of Drumheller going around knocking door on door to get them together to come together as that region. So her presentation is very well done and you can find it on the website. So first I want to take you to a well-known example across Saskatchewan of the abandoned gas station and the underground tanks that are sitting there and lots of people wanting those tanks removed and they know that gas station appears that it has impacts or it's going to have impacts. I want it cleaned up. I want to know if there's any impacts. So the interesting thing about that gas station example is it really only has one contaminant of concern, right, in the hydrocarbons. So that's what we're worried about. We know what's going to happen at that gas station if that tank leaked. So now you have your landfill site, and basically your landfill site is the unknown. So do you know what has been disposed of there for decades and decades of use? Did burning occur? And burning is going to be a reoccurring theme in this presentation. And when you burn that material from a solid state into that ash, you're changing the composition and your chemicals of concern go up, or your contaminants of concern go up. So what's been disposed of there? Has it burning occurred? That's what we need to understand. So the impacts to the environment are really groundwater and surface water first and foremost. Air, wildlife, the soil at that site, but really what we're talking about is human health. So, there's a lot of importance and talk put on drinking water and wastewater. But think of that glass of water that you're drinking and it's gone through that treatment plant. Your landfill has the potential to impact that groundwater source, that drinking water source, before it even gets to your water plant. So a little bit of background in Saskatchewan. A lot of landfills are located in less than desired locations. It was really usually poor farmland, land that wasn't of great use, in coulees, in sloughs, just wherever the most convenient location was. So they haven't historically been properly sited for a landfill. Back in the 70s and 80s, regulations that did come in that prohibited burning. However, the burning has still occurred, causing more potential for concern at those sites. And our waste has changed drastically over the years. Back in the 40s and 50s, it wasn't a high percentage of plastics and carcinogens that were in our waste once you do burn them. So this is a common picture of our site. So a lot of times when we're talking about the regulations and siting and design of sites, lots of communities will say, well, we know our site is good and we have a great line site and lots of clay. And why do we know that? Because that water's not going anywhere. Well, you can't have yourself filling up with water. That's all now leachate. That is a potential contaminant of concern. And will show up at multiple sites where then there's a pump and a hose and it's running off into the neighboring slough or into a surface water body or across a field without being tested. And when we do get the testing done, It is high in concentration in certain parameters and is a potential concern for impacts. Again, a site that's not a badly operated site, but an example of a poor location. So this one is in a pure sand location, so it does not hold any water, and we do know in this site that they have impacted the groundwater below them. Lots of times we might show up and you think what you're seeing from the ground is okay, and this site is one that lots of our EPOs now have UAVs that they might bring with them, and no cover and compaction was occurring at this site. So you can see mounds and mounds of waste there, and so you might think it's okay, and they've gone along the side and picked up the litter, but once we get up there, we can see just how far back into the tree line the litter actually is, and again, that's an impact for the wildlife in the area. So this isn't cute. Most people think it is cute. We hear a lot about Friday and Saturday night entertainment at the landfill of going to watch the bears and hanging out with the bears. So this is definitely not an ideal situation for the bears or the wolves. And so number one, you know, an impact to them. And we have found some sites that have been covering and compacting, and they're not having those wildlife issues anymore. But again, a big concern with human-wildlife interactions and the potential for humans to be attacked by the wildlife at a landfill. So, you know, if you have sand underneath, you're going to have more of an impact than if you have a clay-lined or a geosynthetic-lined site. So you could have a community of 200 that's sitting on a sand site overlying a aquifer, and you could have a community of 50,000 that's sitting on a properly designed landfill, and that community of 200 could potentially have more of an impact than the larger community. So again, we're talking about what is sitting underneath that waste, the precipitation that's falling on that waste and creating the leachate, and where is that leachate going. You know, it's not just the permitted sites. We do look at the unpermitted sites as well. And they do need to be cleaned up and remediated properly to make sure there's no impact. So this is one of the larger sites that we did follow up and deal with, and it is for the most part cleaned up now. But this individual was hauling material from his business out to his own land and saved an estimated $250,000 in tipping fees at the landfill. Again, a little bit more about burning of waste. This was a farmer who had buried or was disposing of about 30 years worth of waste, decided he wanted to get rid of it and decided to burn it. So again, the ministry does follow up on that. You'll see when you go through our regulations, there's an entire list of materials that cannot be burnt without a permit. So I would challenge you, if you ever look at that long list, to find something you can burn other than clean wood. So pretty much everything has plastic in it, and you can't burn plastic, so just think you can't burn anything, and that applies to anyone. And the why really comes down to those, like I said, the environmental, yes, but the human health impacts. So, you know, I was telling a story, and Kelly, I was disappointed. I put my kids in this presentation because usually you have yours in your presentation in the recycle bin. They weren't in yours today.
Right.
So I live on an acres outside of Prince Albert, and had new neighbors moved in and watched all their moving boxes explode outside, and then Christmas exploded outside, and I said to my husband, I bet you they're going to light all of that up. And sure enough, I came home at lunch one day, which I don't usually do, and you could smell it coming down the road, and of course all this black smoke was going straight up my house. And so that was the first time I met my neighbors. So I said, before you move in, always find out what your neighbors do for a living. It's not a great way to meet them. And the other, you know, example is really, you know, whether it's backyard gardens in the city or, you know, strawberry patches or whatever. Again, friends, there's so much education on BPA and plastic water bottles, and everybody rushed out and replaced everything with glass. And baby bottles are glass, and drinking water bottles are glass. And then what did a lot of people do? They took that plastic, took it outside to the burn barrel, and burnt it while their kids were running around, or their strawberry patches next to it. And the impacts from breathing in that smoke, or the ash falling on where you're growing fruit and vegetables, I would argue is probably more of an impact than drinking from that plastic water bottle would have been. So we had a summer student this year who was from the Nipawin area, and if you ask her what the best part of her summer was, she said that she finally got her grandpa to stop using the burning barrel, and it's not falling on the strawberries anymore. He now has a garbage bin that her grandma is very stringent about how he uses it. So Again, a little just a bit more for the education is, we have a big issue with, say, grain bags and other things being burnt in the province right now. And again, trying to educate people that with that burning and what you're doing on the land, it really all comes back to it ends up in our food chain. So whether it's crops being grown, grazing, like I said, backyard, vegetable gardens, when you're burning that material, you're creating that impact to the environment and right back into our food chain. So after that education, really want people to start thinking about what impact is your landfill having. And unfortunately, for most of you, the answer to that question is you don't know. We don't know what we don't know because those sites have not been investigated. The groundwater monitoring isn't in place. We don't know what type of soil you're sitting on, where the groundwater is. So for the majority in the room, you won't be able to answer that question. Drinking water gets a lot of attention because of Walkerton and North Battleford, and so one of the things we say is landfills really aren't getting the attention right now because we haven't had one of those incidences. Many of us would say we just haven't found that incident yet. This is an example for some that are doing site monitoring, and everybody is required to be doing groundwater monitoring, and so we're slowly starting to get people to catch up with getting their piezometers in place and getting that monitoring started. And this is an example of what you'll see coming in with the well locations and the monitoring that's being done. So, the city of Saskatoon or Regina or Prince Albert or other larger sites that have been monitoring for a long time, they have decades worth of information telling them what their impacts are, and everybody else just doesn't know. But as these monitoring reports are starting to come in, a lot of the reports are indicating that there are elevated concentrations. Further investigation is needed. There is leachate impacts leaving the site. So we need to get a better understanding of what's occurring in there. So there are some reports that do come in saying there are no issues or no concerns at this time, and just recommend further ongoing monitoring. But we do have a number of reports coming in that there are identified impacts at the sites. This is a graph of waste disposal operations by jurisdiction. So Alberta has 126 waste facilities. They only have 50 municipal landfills in the entire province. I'll get into Montana a little bit more on the next slide, but Montana has 32. The entire of the United States only has 1,800 landfills. Saskatchewan's currently sitting at 500 waste facility operations. So, we talk about we want to be leaders or we want to be in the forefront. I would argue, looking at this graph, that we're probably not the ones that are right, and we have some work to do. We initially thought we might be 20 years behind other jurisdictions, but through lots of our research and presentations from those in Alberta and Montana, we're probably closer to 40 years behind everybody else in our education, our movement on landfills and solid waste management. So, with the United States and other jurisdictions, they have a greater appreciation and understanding for the impacts to their groundwater and the need to protect it and the scarcity of their water sources. So they started work on this quite a while ago. The Saskatchewan example, unfortunately, landfills are pretty much uncommon in this province and dumps are more common. So we're trying to work towards building up the number of landfills in the province. But if you look at the picture of the province, it pretty much looks like a pin cushion of dumps scattered across the province. So thinking about that, and we hear a lot, stop trying to compare us to Ontario or British Columbia or Alberta. We're not the same as them. So we sat down and, well, how similar could we be to Montana? So this fall, SWANA did manage to bring up my counterpart from Montana to give some presentations across the province. So Montana talks about how they're the same geographic areas as L'Orange and South. They're pretty much to the number, the identical population. They're very sparsely populated in parts of their state. They have communities from 15 to 15,000. They have 32 landfills. They used to have, in the 90s, 514 communities and 514 dumps. One night, groundwater monitoring came into play. The next morning, they had 32 landfills because their fines are $30,000 a day for noncompliance. So nobody wanted to be in that state of noncompliance. So they have 32. Their haul costs are up to 150 miles. So you can see ours looks like a pin cushion. This is now the location of Montana's landfills. A bit about the cost, and again, these presentations can be found on the SUMA website, and one of the consultants gives a presentation on how capital costs to actually build a landfill are comparable across locations. So depending on whether you need clay liner or geosynthetic or leachate collection, your input costs to the construction of the landfill, regardless on your population size, are pretty consistent. So if you're a community of 200, it's going to cost you the same for tonnage to build that landfill as a community of 200,000. However, once you get into the operational costs, regardless of if you're the city of Regina or or the town of Eston or wherever you come from, you require that same operator, you require that same compactor, you require that same litter collection, you require that same monitoring. All of your operational costs are the same, but spread out over a different tonnage or population base. So if you're looking at 5,000 tons a year, you're looking at $130 to $225 just to operate that landfill, not the construction. Once you go up in tonnage, your costs per ton are dropping. So they're trying to show that the more tonnage you're receiving, the cost to operate your landfill is less. A little bit about incineration. It's not that incineration is prohibited or banned, but it does require approval, and we're not talking about glorified burning barrels when we're talking about incineration. We are talking about industrial facilities, and most of the numbers show that incineration is more costly than proper landfilling. So, we don't really see it in North America. We still have the land base to be landfilling properly at that lower cost versus a Europe or some other jurisdictions that don't have the land to be landfilling and are forced to move to incineration. But the other issue is you also require a high volume of waste to keep those incinerators going. So, jurisdictions like Saskatchewan may not even have enough waste to properly run an incinerator. So once you put together the cost of constructing and operating a landfill, again, showing the benefits of working together and the economies of scale really shows that for a 5,000 ton a year landfill, you have to charge between $143 and $245 a ton to have that landfill. Once you get up to the 20,000 tons a year, you're at $67 to $109 a ton. We still have communities in the province submitting us applications to construct and operate a 200 ton a year landfill. So if you do the math on going from 5,000 tons down to 200 tons on what you would have to charge to construct and operate that landfill, I don't even want to know what the number is, so I'm not going to do the math. Some tipping fees across jurisdictions. The city of Calgary at $111 a ton. Again, there's variation depending on what waste is. So some are now charging higher tipping fees if you bring in mixed waste. So if you bring in mixed waste, it could be a higher tonnage than if you've actually done the separation yourself, and some of it can go for recycling or other uses. So City of Lethbridge, Drumheller is $10 to $111 a ton. Prince Albert for our main ones in the province right now is probably low, and North Battleford is, I think, if not one of the highest, and that's because Mike lives there and he's mean and always watching them. So other Saskatchewan landfills, it's very common. They're still free. Historically, we haven't been charging, so we don't have the funds in many communities now to be doing the proper decommissioning, but we get free as an answer lots of times, or $0. I don't know why they're different, but they'll give us different answers. Kindersley, again, gave a good presentation at the education sessions, and their example is before their fire. Their operator is really just a wink or a smoking gun and catch you later. We'll get you next time. Don't worry about paying. Keeps jumping. Lots of times it's said that it's on our taxes, and so we don't charge anymore, and some communities might actually be charging $5. A bit about closure costs. Again, you'll see these costs in a presentation on the SUMA website. This would be an expensive landfill closure. A lot of times you don't see stormwater ponds, and I think this was a rather large area site, and so the cost came out about $413,000. But the reason I use this example is just to highlight that the majority of the costs in your landfill decommissioning aren't actually the consultant costs or the groundwater monitoring costs. They are in the cost of your cover material to actually get that waste footprint covered so that it can't generate any more leachate going forward and have that potential impact to the groundwater. So from talking to a lot of the consultants in the province, if you're looking at your smaller 1 hectare closure, you're probably down in that $200,000 range for average. So we will have some that are coming in well less than that, and we will have some that are more, but that $200,000 is what's been told to us is average for decommissioning in the province. But again, The engineering and groundwater monitoring cost is not the major cost of that work. Right now, oil field is slow. Those consultants and drilling companies are looking for work, so costs may be coming down. So you could take advantage of that right now. You know, I said the cover system and that clay to cap that site is the expensive part, but depending on your site, a consultant may recommend a geosynthetic liner that is less cost than the clay. From the ministry standpoint, that decommissioning work, we do work with you to come up with a plan. As long as we see a plan in place that funds are going to be built up and that decommissioning is going to happen. The first step we're looking for is just that physical closure of that site. Then the groundwater monitoring and site investigation to understand what is at that site or what is occurring, and then the actual decommissioning can occur over a number of years. The long-term liability of the site is really what we're looking to help communities reduce. You need to know what's happening at your site. You need to understand that. You are required to put that as a liability in our financial statement through government relations. So we'll get a lot of calls asking us, well, what's it going to cost to decommission our landfill? Well, again, we can't tell you. It is all site specific. So that same work you would have to do to determine your liability costs for your financial statement is the same work that would be used to put together your decommissioning plan for your site. So going forward a bit on innovation and working together on regionalization and decommissioning work. Again, if you're looking to move to a regional landfill or joining regional landfills that are already in place, you know, there might be a way to reduce costs if a number of communities are looking at decommissioning at the same time or getting their site investigation work done at the same time. If consultants and drill rigs only have to mobilize once, you can save some costs there. Again, grant opportunities are usually looked at now in regional concepts. So again, if you can build some of your regional decommissioning into your regional operations, there might be some grant opportunities there. What type of waste management sites do we have going forward? You know, the way a site is designed is based on the waste that's going in it. So are you designing to accept industrial waste? Some sites have seen that they're up against a new potash mine, so they're designing to take industrial waste to generate revenue there. Are you just taking municipal waste? Are you an area that has a lot of construction and demolition waste? You're close to a resort area that people are buying $500,000 cabins, tearing them down and building $2 million cabins or whatever they're doing and thinking they should dispose of that waste for free. Well, generally your construction and demolition waste is more costly to transport because of the waste. So can you design just an inert landfill closer to that area rather than hauling back to the nearest municipal landfill? What types of recycling can occur in an area? You know, around the major centers, we have a lot more recycling of construction and demolition waste, shingles, that kind of thing, because there is the volume. As other areas of the province start to come together, you can see those same economies of scale and start to realize benefits and recycling companies starting up. So economic development, there is money to be made in waste, and waste should generate revenue. It shouldn't be at a loss. I don't know why this keeps jumping around. You know, is there new business opportunity through new private operations of landfills? Private companies, waste collection companies or transport companies, new recycling facilities starting up that start to become an economic player. But really the message at the end of the day is waste management is not free. So a lot of times when we're out and talking to communities, they say, well, you know, we're not as big as Saskatoon, so we shouldn't pay the same to get rid of our waste. Well, why should it be cheaper to get rid of your waste just because you don't live in that city? So, you know, waste disposal is, like we said, the more waste you're collecting, then it should be a reduced fee. A bit about, you know, just a reminder that waste really doesn't go away. So what you've disposed of in those cells for decades and decades, it's still there. It's not going anywhere. So what impact is it going to have into the generations going forward? And this is a picture from when the city of Saskatoon was drilling their gas wells and the waste coming back up. So this paper was from the 70s and it was still there perfectly intact a few years ago. So just a good reminder that waste is not going anywhere, but it does have the potential to have impacts for generations to come. We hear a lot about, as we start to see less landfills, further haul costs, increased tipping fees, that we'll just see more waste dumped in areas of the city or out in the rural areas. We've asked the jurisdictions if they experience this as they move to regionalization, and they've really told us no. Those that aren't going to do the right thing aren't going to do the right thing regardless of what's in place for them. But there is a pilot project in the Prince Albert area between the city of Prince Albert and the two RMs. to try and bring stakeholders together to deal with illegal dumping and littering in the area. And we had 80 unauthorized dump sites identified between those, and I think we got 62 cleaned up last year by the stakeholders. So the pilot has gone through its first year, so you might see more information come out about that going forward of how we join together to combat that issue. But the group is on Facebook, and it's Keep Prince Albertan Area Beautiful. So I just encourage you, the presentations that I kind of picked and chose some information, like I said, tried to take a day's worth of sessions and compile them into 20 minutes, are on the SWANA website. And really it's just a message about what are we going to do for those generations to come and to leave for those future generations. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to Che-Wei, who will talk about where we're going as a province.
Can everyone still hear me? Good. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about solid waste management strategy. Sarah gave a very good background information on where the landfills, transfer stations are. And the idea of solid waste management strategy has been around for a few years. A lot actually originally came from a lot of urban municipalities who was wondering about, what does it mean for the province when we're growing? And more people actually means more waste. I don't know if you guys figured that one out yet. It's fairly simple. And also when the province was developing the environmental code, there was definitely some discussion on what does this mean with the environmental code and what does it mean to overall solid waste. So we've been thinking about these ideas, and we do have some rationale why the province needs a solid waste management strategy. There you go. So first is that it's important to address the waste from the entire perspective. So from the, right now, if you look at tools of managing waste, you can do recycling, you can do landfilling, there's also illegal burning. So what does it mean that can we bring all the tools together and manage our waste in a more holistic way? And also when it comes to solid waste, and we often get asked questions at conference and workshop, is that what are the best practices out there and what does it mean? Where can we get the information? And solid waste management strategy can also provide that aspect of having best practices available and communication aspect of getting that information out. And the last one, wow, it's really jumping ahead, eh? All right, the last one is coordinating. Because like I said, there is definitely more than one tools that's available. How do we bring all the stakeholders together, all the actors together, and making sure that our system are working in the most effective and efficient way. Come on. So here's some areas that we believe the solid waste management strategy should focus on. And I think some of this area are not a surprise to you. And first one is having integrated solid waste management system. That means that right now there are definitely a lot of facilities out there. Are there ways that we can bring the facility together? Are there ways that regions or municipalities can build partnership among the neighbors and working together? Another one that we see definitely an aspect and also is a trend is to have more waste reduction and diversion. When it comes to managing waste, the first aspect is actually reduce, reuse, and recycle. And then moving down to landfill. So, having regulations on recycling definitely is a good tool because it obligates producers to design products that are more efficient to recycle and more efficient to be reused. And the last one is government leadership. One of them is on innovation and technology. The technology are getting better, and there's definitely more new technology out there, internal recycling or even incinerators. So how do we incorporate that aspect into our waste management? And also looking into communication and education, because a lot of time that the communities cannot do the right thing because they're not aware of it. It's kind of funny now he doesn't want to. Oh, there you go. Work complete to date. A lot of these are internal research, and a lot of research that we have done in terms of looking at other provinces on what they have done and the direction it went down, lessons learned. And we also did research on identifying the gaps in Saskatchewan. What are we looking at in terms of gaps on our waste management? And also we identified some themes, which the last slide I talked about a few of them. And we also have a timeline now that we're following. Timeline can be a challenging one. Sometimes it changes. So whatever I'm going to talk about here is what we're following. But however, if more time required, that would definitely be added to it. So in terms of a consultation to date, most of these are very initial preliminary discussions with stakeholders. They're nothing firm being determined and decided. We started back in November 2014. We went to some SUMA sessions. And this last year, 2015, we attended Waste Reduction Council's education. And November 2015, we went back to SUMA again. And we asked just very few questions, like how do you feel about having a solid waste management strategy? What do you think should be included? What are some topics you would like to see? And people tell us that they would like to have a strategy. Oh, there you go. There's definitely support for need to have a roadmap and a plan for the province in the long term. We also get a lot of feedback on having the strategy should look into a municipal solid waste system in terms of issues and opportunities. And one of them is that they're looking at, what tools are available or can be created to help more regional cooperation. There's definitely a support for more recycling and waste diversion program. And the last one is financial resources must be part of the plan. A lot of feedback we're getting that is whatever recommendations are coming out of it, it's important that the provinces consider the financial impact on the stakeholders. Could be urban municipalities, could be private sector, it could be the province. Because without that, then implementation would be hard to do, and then it would not, internal long-term plan would not happen unless there's right resources available. So when it comes to what we're doing now, come on, there you go. Our next step, we don't want to develop this strategy in silos, so we're creating an advisory committee and try to work with environment, government relations, and health and economy, because waste often cut through more than one ministries. We're hoping to have a draft strategy done by early 2016. It has to go through the initial review process, and we hope that we can start the official engagement in later 2016. So what I meant is that a lot of things I share with you is just what we heard so far. The plan hasn't been identified. There isn't a firm recommendation on a lot. Actually, there's no firm recommendation at this moment. So what we want to do is that we want to inform you, making sure that you are aware of what we're doing in terms of plan, and we can and later on, once you have a draft plan, then there will be opportunity for more discussion and engagement. Could be either through SUMA or through you individually. However, we want you to aware of this and definitely be part of the strategy.